The doctor slipped me a secret note that read, "Don't go home, run." That night, I discovered my own family was planning to have me committed to a nursing home and a forged permission to strip me of everything. But what they didn't know was that I had a secret that would change their lives forever. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Fluorescent light hummed above the exam room, as if it had a throat. I sat there with the paper square burning a cool shape into my palm. The ink had smudged at one corner where Dr. Simone Park's thumb had pressed, a small crescent like a bruise in reverse. She looked at me the way a bridge engineer looks at a cable, patient, exacting, not afraid of weight. She said, "My numbers are strong." She said, "What worries me is not your heart." I said, "I hear you. I will make decisions in daylight." The paper felt heavier than the whole room. I did not open it yet. Habit is a soft rope that can strangle you, and mine was to put everything in order before I let my mind speak. I tied my scarf. I straightened the rails of the hospital gown on the chair. I slid the paper into my purse beneath the old leather flap that catches on my ring. The fluorescent hum tapered when I pushed the door and stepped into the corridor. An elevator bell pinged, and I counted to 3 before stepping in. A woman in a teal cardigan glanced at my hands as if worry could smell, then looked away. The lobby smelled like antiseptic and lemon. Someone wheeled a cart of sealed packets past, the plastic rattling in a hopeful way. I nodded once at the security guard. Outside, the air had that clean bite that belongs to late autumn when the sky decides to be honest and leaves no cloud to hide behind. A taxi idled. I raised a hand without raising my face. The door handle was cold. I told the driver Crestline Bayside first, then we will see. The meter clicked like a metronome with no song. Streetlights ticked by in regular beats, gold, gold, red, then the dark between. I waited. My palm had a memory of the paper square, so finally I took it out. The fold opened like a map to someplace you do not want to go but must see clearly. 4 short lines, each written as if speed itself had to be quiet. Family asked about capacity. Requested placement. Inquired about assets. Do not go home. I held the note nearer to the window and watched the handwriting move with the shadows of passing trees. "Do not go home" is a simple sentence. It lifted a hook from my chest I had not known was there, a hook made of decades of trying to be the steady person in any room. I closed the note and put it back. I could feel the small ridge of the fold under my thumbnail. The taxi rolled through my street without turning. My porch light blinked on a timer that nobody reset when daylight changed. The glass in the side lights held 2 long shapes like closed eyes. I saw my living room for a moment with the memory that houses keep. The end table with the dent from a dropped wrench when Matthew was 10 and determined to fix a lamp. The bookshelf that I leveled with pennies. The little brass lighthouse keychain that belonged to my husband, set on the hook by the door to remind me that a fixed light exists even in fog. I saw it all, and then I let it pass. The taxi meter beeped once, as if in agreement. I told the driver to keep going until the water showed. He nodded. At the shore, black water shifted under sodium lamps. I asked him to circle back, not to my street, to the bank. The hour was late, but the outer vestibule would be open for the deposit box door. I knew the rules of what can be done, even when nobody is smiling at you. The glass doors reflected me as 2 versions, one with a scarf, one with the scarf fallen open, both of them decided. The bank was closed, of course, but I stood near the metal night slot and took out the small envelope that held my safe deposit key. It felt like a scale in my hand, balanced, decisive. I would return here at first opening. I put the key back in its envelope and slid it into the coin pocket of my purse where it always lived. The driver waited without tapping the wheel. People who work nights understand that silence is a service. "Hotel next," I said. "The Fairwinds on Harbor." He nodded again. The taxi sighed away from the curb and the sound of tires on damp pavement wrote a line I could follow without looking. I allowed my breath to lengthen to match it. My phone vibrated 3 times in quick succession. Matthew's name, then Harper's, then Sloane's. I let them leave their messages for the future we were all about to earn. In the elevator to the hotel lobby, a small boy pressed a button with the seriousness of a notary. The doors opened on a floor of polished stone that held the light like a shallow pool. The clerk looked up with the fixed courtesy of midnight and said, "Welcome back," before checking herself as if we had met. I said a room would help me sleep when morning decided what to do. She nodded the way doctors do when they are not doctors but still understand triage. I wrote Rosalie Quinn in the signature line with the pen that was attached to a silver chain. A chain is just a reminder to return what you borrow from the world. In the room, the air was set 1 degree too cool. Hotels always pick a temperature that makes you notice the blanket. I set my purse on the desk and took out the note. I laid it flat on the wood and pressed it at the corners. The ink crescent looked like a thumbnail moon. I placed my reading glasses beside it and sat in the upright chair that exists in every hotel room for people who cannot think while lying down. I could hear the harbor faintly when the air unit paused, that brush of water against stone that never apologizes. I took a small notebook from my purse, the one with grid paper, because straight lines calm me. I wrote a list that started with 3 names and a question mark each. Matthew, Harper, Sloan. Capacity, placement, assets. Under that I wrote 4 verbs that do not change when fear is in the room. Verify, secure, document, notify. The order matters more than the adjectives. Verify that my body is mine and my mind is mine. Secure the papers that say so. Document every move they make and every word they pretend means love. Notify the places where strangers will believe me before relatives will. I listened to my phone again without answering it. Matthew's voice came through, rounded at the edges by false concern. He said he had made the porch light bright so I would not trip. He said he would pick up my prescription in the morning, the one I never asked him to touch. He said he was up late looking at retirement homes in case I wanted company my own age. I wrote the words placement shopping in the notebook and drew a line under it. Harper's message was a smile pretending to be a sentence. She said everyone was only thinking of what is best. She said decisions get heavy and families are for carrying. She said her friend had a spreadsheet for organizing medications. I wrote pillbox switch risk and drew a small square where the week should be. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then I wrote the name of my medication exactly as printed on the pharmacy label and underlined it twice. I have seen documents win or lose cases over a missing letter. Sloan tried to sound light. She said grandmothers and girls should go for pedicures and frozen yogurt on Saturdays. She said she missed that. Then her breath caught and she said sorry. I meant we should plan something. There was a scrape of a chair in the background and a voice not hers said keep it simple. I put the phone down and did not play that part again. I unfolded the note once more to check that I had not invented its words. Family asked about capacity, requested placement, inquired about assets. Do not go home. Each line measured me against the person I have always been and asked if that person would be quiet. I looked up at the hotel mirror. I saw a woman who once set a level on a bookshelf and refused to accept almost even. I saw the lighthouse keychain in my mind, brass worn smooth by 2 hands that were not mine alone. My husband knew storms. He had tied the boat to cleats 1,000 times so that sleep could happen. He had said when you cannot control the water, you control the knot. I made my knots on paper. Tomorrow at 8, bank open, safe deposit box, originals in hand, copies to a fireproof folder. Call doctor. Park's office to request a signed summary of labs and cognitive assessment, attached to file, retain counsel, elder law, Crestline Bay. My hands did not shake. I have always written clean under pressure. People confuse kindness with softness, and softness with lack of structure. But bridges are kind if you are on them, and they do not let you fall. I stood and crossed the room to the window. The blackout curtain parted with a shush, as if to remind me that some things are designed to close well. Below, a couple argued softly near the taxi line. One gesture said, "You never listen." Another said, "You are always right." Their breath made little clouds. He lifted their suitcase into a trunk and looked up once as if the window had called his name. I let the curtain fall. I placed the folded note between the first and second page of my notebook, like a marker. I put both into the room safe and set a code that means nothing to anyone but my hands. I set my phone on the nightstand face down and turned the ringer to the quiet setting that still lets emergency alerts through. Fear would like you to listen for footsteps. Wisdom listens for the elevator bell in the morning. In the bathroom, I rinsed the hotel glass and filled it with water. I took my own medication from my own bottle and said the name out loud because I like the sound of certainty. I turned off the light and lay down. The air unit clicked, then hushed. My heart made a steady sound as if bored with this day. The note in the safe made no sound at all, and yet I could feel it. The paper square that unfolds like a map, the ink smudged like a thumbprint. The 4 lines that carried me past my own porch to a room where nothing knew me, and therefore nothing could lie to me. I will make decisions in daylight. I will trust the fixed lights I set years ago when I was not tired and not afraid. Morning will find me at the bank with a key that weighs more than it looks. I will verify, secure, document, notify. I will keep my voice even and my pen full. I will let the law be the loudest one in the room. The porch light blinked twice. They had left it on timer, not for welcome. The walkway still held last night's dew like a secret. I stood a moment to let my eyes adjust, then stepped inside and met the familiar odor of lemon wipes and something manufactured that tries to smell like flowers. The hallway mirror returned a version of me that looked rested enough to answer questions. On the hook below, it hung the brass lighthouse keychain, warm from the morning Sunday, my husband's compass masquerading as a souvenir. Fixed light, fixed course. Harper called from the kitchen in that cheerful tone people use at hospitals and children's museums. "We were wondering when you'd get back. Coffee is on." She appeared with a mug already poured as if generosity could be staged. Matthew's voice came behind her, less practiced. "We worry when you wander off. Decisions are hard at your age." He pretended to laugh, softening the words the way sandpaper softens wood. I put my purse on the console where a small bowl waits to catch keys and loose change, and anything else you might set down without thinking. I kept the purse strap looped over my wrist. The stove clicked once, twice, then the pilot breathed to life with a low whoosh. Steam rose from the kettle in a thin ribbon. Sloane moved past me without touching and opened the refrigerator. "Morning," she said, looking at ingredients rather than faces. When she closed the door, a paper magnet slipped and revealed a corner of a document tucked under a magazine. A tab stuck out as if it wanted honest air. The words on the tab were clean and neat and carried my name like a trophy engraved before the game ends. Draft POA, M. Quinn. Harper noticed my glance. Her hand floated to the pile and squared it like a dealer tidying a deck. She smiled the tidy smile of people who practice in the mirror. "Just safety planning, no big deal." Her voice fell into the quiet with a weight lighter than it deserved. I returned the smile that means I have heard everything and will store it exactly where it belongs. The kettle began to murmur. Matthew took the mug from Harper and set it in front of me as if a coaster could fix something larger. He said the pharmacy called last week about refills and we can handle pickups from now on. Easier for you. I walked to the counter where the pill organizer lived. The compartment slid with that cheap plastic rasp. Monday was not Monday anymore. The printed label strip had been replaced, slightly misaligned, the adhesive edge lifting at a corner like a hangnail. My medication name wore an incorrect dosage, a number off by just enough to matter later. The insert sheet behind it had a different font than the pharmacy's standard. My breath made a fog on the coffee steam, and then the fog was gone. I set the organizer back the way people set down something that could sting. Harper watched that small movement and placed a hand flat on the counter as if to hold the kitchen to the floor. "We put together a spreadsheet for your morning routine," she said. "I find lists comforting. Color-coded columns, nothing dramatic." Sloane leaned on the island and scrolled her phone. Her nail tapped the case with a rhythm you could use to count time if clocks failed. She did not look up when she said her friend's grandmother joined a residence with a garden and art classes, and it was like, not sad at all. She shrugged, eyes staying on the screen where a filtered life slid by in squares. A phone vibrated once on the table and stopped. The sound made a small circle in the air and then closed. Matthew glanced at the screen without picking it up. "Financial planner," he said to no one. "We have a meeting Thursday, and it might be good for you to sit in. Just a check-in on long-term needs." He opened a folder and let me see nothing except that there were more folders. His wristwatch flashed briefly in a rectangle of light and then returned to Matt. I took the mug they had poured for me and carried it to the sink. I ran water and rinsed the cup until the ceramic felt honest. I dried it with a towel hung to look purposeful and set it back upside down, a simple refusal that leaves no bruise. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I could see the backyard as a sheet of pale grass with a single dark line where the sprinkler had broken last spring. Matthew said he fixed it, and then the line stayed. We sat in a formation that looked ordinary. Harper took the chair closest to the whiteboard where a shopping list waited for a hand to admit we were out of milk. Matthew stood. Sloane half sat on the stool with one foot on the rung and one toe touching tile as if ready to move if the scene asked for it. My own chair steadied itself under me with a small creak that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with weight. They started with the softest words they owned. Traffic is worse than it used to be. Banks have new scams. Scammers target seniors. Companies make forms you cannot read without a law degree. We worry because the world is not gentle. We can handle the calls. We can be a buffer. There is no harm in having papers ready. They spoke in a chorus so well-tuned that I could hear where they had rehearsed. The pilot flame whispered under the kettle. I let the hush stretch until the room remembered who used to make the rules here. I said a buffer is useful when you are a dam, and water is pressing. I said I will read anything with my name at the top. Harper laughed lightly and said you always were so independent, and she made the words sound like charming except the corner of her mouth curled on the wrong beat. Matthew opened the folder again and let a single page slip far enough to show an insurance company logo. He slid it away before the page could get its bearings. Sloane finally put her phone down flat. She reached for the pill organizer and opened Friday with a click that echoed too loudly for a kitchen. That little square was empty. She closed it. Her eyes flicked up to me and then down. She said we should plan Saturday for nails and yogurt, and she said it with rehearsed brightness, but her throat moved after like she had swallowed a pebble. Harper stepped in with her weather voice and said that would be lovely because routines are healthy at any age. The house made its old noises, the kind that tell you it still recognizes your footsteps. A truck downshifted in the street. Somewhere in the living room, a vent ticked as metal adjusted to warm air. The lighthouse keychain in the hallway caught a slice of sunlight and threw it onto the baseboard in a small wedge. I thought about how sailors read light, not as a decoration, but as instruction. I thought about how the keychain is shaped to fit a palm and press a decision into it. Matthew finally said what he had been shaping. We found a community near the bay with a clinic and classes and a shuttle. He used the words waiting list and deposit in a sentence that did not ask permission. He used my first name and then shortened it like he used to when he was 12 and wanted the car keys. He mentioned a tour. He said he had blocked his calendar for Thursday in case paperwork needed a witness. I looked at their faces one by one in the calm that comes when a storm commits to landfall. I said, thank you for thinking ahead. I said I will keep my appointment book myself. I said clarity is a kindness when money and medicine enter the room. Harper tilted her head in that measured way that suggests empathy and also hides impatience. She said of course, and slid the magazine to fully cover the tab of the file. The corners still showed a sliver of white. I stood and carried my purse to the hallway. The brass lighthouse met my sleeve with a soft clink. I paused there and let my hand rest on the wood of the doorframe worn smooth by years of groceries and school backpacks and a dog that is now a picture. The phone on the kitchen table vibrated again and stopped. The sound made a second small circle and closed. In the quiet that followed, I could hear the pilot flame under the stove and the faint slide of a pill compartment settling back into place. Abuse often dresses itself before breakfast. It smiles, it offers coffee, it moves labels and calls it help. It files drafts and calls it planning. Paperwork can be velvet. Underneath, it is a blade. I took the keychain off its hook and let the lighthouse rest in my palm until the weight taught my skin the lesson again. Then I hung it back. Fixed lights do not travel. People do. At 2:11 a.m., the return vent turned their whispers into radio. The HVAC sighed through the duct above my bed, and the house carried their voices along the metal like a wire. I lay still and let the dark hold its shape around me. The phone in my palm woke without light. The recorder opened to a blank timeline. One quiet button lit a red dot that glowed against my blanket like a coal. Kettle tick. A cupboard touched wood. The refrigerator motor kicked in with a low, steady drone. Harper's voice arrived first, trimmed and careful, the sound of someone already practicing for a room with wood paneling and a seal on the wall. Confusion needs documentation if you want a judge to believe it. The vent swallowed her final consonant and then returned Matthew in a rougher tone. We get the guardianship, then we handle the sale. I raised the phone an inch closer to the grill. The red dot held its patient pulse. Paper slid on stone. Harper said she had a list of cooperative clinics if Dr. Park insisted on being unhelpful. Crestline Behavioral had a new intake director, she said, and Bayside Memory made exceptions for family reports. She cited a date, Thursday at 9, as if scheduling itself were compassion. Matthew said the realtor could start their steps once papers cleared, and he named Seabright's junior agent as eager. He said the market couldn't wait for anyone's nostalgia. His fork tapped a plate. Sloane cut in, softer, a leaf sound against pavement. "I'm not lying to a doctor." The room shifted around her sentence. A chair foot squeaked. Harper matched the pitch a mother uses when she turns a rule into a lullaby. "No one is lying. We are highlighting patterns. If she forgets the kettle or repeats a story, that is information." Sloane said repeating a story proves nothing except that the person telling it lived more than once. Her voice tried to hold steady, and almost did. The kettle ticked again as metal cooled, then clicked into another register. Matthew poured and sighed like a man coming off a hill. He spoke about sedatives in low doses to help me rest, how a small adjustment makes observation clearer. "Pharmacy mix-ups happen," Harper said, "and sometimes it helps to simplify a regimen." There was a pause long enough for someone to meet someone else's eyes. I could hear the idea entering the room, even before anyone named it. Switch one label for another. Move Tuesday to Monday. A handful of small things. Then nod solemnly when the patient appears confused. I watched the red dot like I would watch a lighthouse in rough water. It never blinked at the wrong time. Harper returned to logistics. She had printed forms from the county site, temporary guardianship requests, physician statements of capacity, release of information sheets that turn a person into a file. She had pre-filled the header with my name and an address I know better than any song. Matthew said his friend at Beacon Title would fast-track the preliminary report the minute a signature existed to let him ask. His friend liked baseball and efficiency. He would not ask moral questions, no document required. Sloane again, thinner now. She said if anyone asks me to say my grandmother leaves the stove on, I will not say it. She said I have been in this house when the stove was watched like a sleeping child. Harper lengthened her silence, then set it down. No one needs to say anything untrue. Memory is fuzzy at her age, and that is not a moral failure. A judge only needs a pattern and a plan. We are building both for her own good. The refrigerator motor clicked off, and the absence of it made the distance between us smaller. I could hear the spoon stirring a mug. I could hear Matthew's throat clear before numbers came out. He named this month's deficit, the work he had lost, the payments he had made in hope rather than sense. "If we do not settle her finances under our umbrella," he said, "my umbrella will not cover anyone's head." He added a date for a meeting with a man called Nolan Pike behind a clinic that had shut down last spring when inspectors started asking where the paper trails bent. Harper spoke the name like a password. Pike can help format what doctors see. He knows the correct letterheads. He knows how to unify stories. She used words that should never be near medicine unless you are designing a brochure. She mapped it out like a clean hallway. First a visit with Crestline Behavioral, then a consult at Bayside Memory. If signatures proved difficult, Mr. Pike would provide clarifying documents from physicians who no longer practice here. Old ink looks plausible in the right light. Sloane's stool creaked. "Do you hear yourselves?" she said, and the vent carried the chisel under her question. Matthew softened. He said outcomes matter, not methods. He said a judge would rather see a family prepared than a family in chaos. He said the house had equity that could do good work if someone not exhausted managed it. He said a deposit at a community would secure safety and social time. He said social time like a candy at a dentist. I let the air move through the duct and over my face. The recorder's timeline became a small river of pale sound. I pictured the forms Harper described, the tidy fields where a slow signature turns a person into a task. I pictured my name, a list of medications, a checkbox for unsteady gait. A question that invites anyone with tired eyes to circle yes, the blade under velvet. Harper returned to her rhythm. She described the weekly organizer as a helpful tool when the days blur. She described how the pharmacy sometimes mislabels and it is loving to fix it. Her fork touched her plate again. She said a 3 milligram tablet looks like a 5 when light is bad. Better if someone else handles. Would it be so terrible to take one small burden from a woman who has carried so much? Sloane's breath caught. I heard it the way sailors learn to hear weather turn. If there is a burden you want to carry, she said, carry honesty. The refrigerator motor started again and made her next words hard to catch. I leaned closer to the vent. My knuckles pressed the wall. The red dot held, patient and tireless. Sloane said I do not want to be part of anything that asks me to forget what I saw. She said my grandmother wrote down every serial number on every warranty in this house. She said if she repeats a story, it is because she likes the ending. Matthew set his mug down too hard and the sound lapped the threshold. He lowered his voice. We need to stop pretending that stories pay bills. We do what needs doing now or none of us lands anywhere. Guardianship. Then we handle the sale. He drew a line under the words with his tone. The HVAC sighed above me as if the house were tired of listening. Harper reset the table. She said Thursday at 9 for Crestline Behavioral, Friday afternoon for Bayside Memory if needed, an appointment pinned to a kitchen calendar that would later act surprised to see ink where blank used to be. She said she had called Seabright to ask which documents an agent requires to begin an opinion of value. She said the agent had smiled through the phone. They always smile through the phone. Sloane's stool scraped back. Her foot hit the baseboard. I pictured her standing, arms folded, chin lifted in a compromise between child and adult. She said, I will not stand in a room and say a thing I know isn't real. I will not tell a doctor that she left the stove when I watched her turn the knob and say out loud the word off. Harper put the teacher back in her spine. No one is asking you to perform. We are asking you to cooperate. The difference is tone, not intent. The kettle ticked again, though no one had reheated it. Metal cools in layers and names those layers for anyone who listens. I lowered the phone, checked the waveform, and felt the same gratitude I feel for a tool that behaves. The red dot glowed. It did not judge. It did not hurry. It simply kept proof breathing. Matthew exhaled and turned practical. He said we would need Social Security cards to add to a file because clerks love to say missing, and he did not want to be sent home. He said the bank would require identification for any switch. He said it would be efficient if he gathered those things today while I rested. He said rested like a command that wears a sweater. Harper's chair slid. I heard paper stack and stack again until corners aligned. Good, she said, and this time her voice carried relief, the kind that visits when a scheme finds its shoes. She outlined the walk: clinic, forms, bank, title, agent. She did not mention the part where a life gets smaller. She did not mention the part where a person who signs her own name becomes a task on a calendar someone else checks off. Sloane's phone vibrated once. She breathed out through her nose and let it stop. The fridge motor cut. Silence expanded. Somewhere the cat pawed at the sliding door and found it locked. Harper said bed. She said it like a line spoken at the end of the second act, before the set rotates and a new room appears. Chairs moved. A faucet ran for 3 seconds and turned off. Feet on stairs. A door. Another door. I watched the red dot for one more breath, then pressed stop. The recorder clicked like a latch on a small, precise box. The HVAC shifted to a lower register, and the vent lost its appetite for words. In the hush, my pulse counted itself and refused to rush. Predators count on silence. Evidence starts with one quiet button. I set the phone under my pillow where the light could not give me away, and I let the house be a house again until morning asked me to walk into my plan. I left a neutral note on the counter and took the key that never moved, safe deposit box 314. The steel was small and heavier than its size admitted. It pressed a clean circle into my palm as if to say decide. I set my purse strap across my body and walked out without borrowing any drama from the door. The morning air was new and had not met our family yet. It let me breathe like a stranger. The bank opened on the dot. People made small shapes on the sidewalk with coffee lids and lists. Inside, the vestibule smelled like paper and ink, the old scent that always calmed me because it means someone intends to keep track. I greeted the guard with a nod that said I do not need help, and he answered with a nod that said I will be here anyway. The teller asked how she could assist, and I asked to access my box. She checked my identification with the earnest attention of someone trained to trust and verify, not choose. She slid a clipboard in my direction. My signature went down the line with no wobble. The vault door rolled, a low thunder that always feels like a promise wrapped in metal. The attendant led me past stacks of gray doors that do not care about anyone's feelings. 314 waited where it always waits. The key turned, and the sound it made belonged to the word relief, even if the dictionary has not discovered that yet. I carried the tray to a small table in a private booth and locked the booth from the inside. The room held a chair, a pen on a chain, and the quiet of a chapel that never learned hymns. I lifted the lid. My husband's hand lived in here as surely as any photograph of him. On top lay a folder marked with my handwriting from a decade ago when I believed preparedness was a kind of love. The first document carried a seal with our county's crest. The deed to my home with my name alone as owner, recorded and stamped in a year when Matthew still asked permission to borrow the car. Beneath it, a crisp packet held my healthcare directive and HIPAA authorization with my own signature, naming myself as the only agent when I am competent and naming no one else when I am not. I touched the margin the way people touch a railing before going down a staircase. The prior will sat in a blue cover with a notary acknowledgement and a witness attestation that read like a choir. It did not say anyone else may sign for me now. It did not whisper hint, or maybe. It simply said what it said in ink that had already dried years ago. Under it I found pill logs I used to keep after my husband's surgery, every dosage, every time, every note in my precise hand, proof that I know the difference between 3 milligrams and 5, even under fluorescent lights. At the bottom waited a business card with a name I recognized from friendly conversations at the branch. Gerald Benton, Senior Manager. On the back, my husband had written in his measured printing, "Call this man if anything ever goes sideways." I sat with that for a moment, the knowledge that grief and foresight can be neighbors. I took my phone out and called the number on the card. It rang twice, and then a steady voice answered with his name. I said my own and said I was at the vault, and that I would be grateful for 5 minutes of his attention when he was free. He told me he could speak now. He said we can flag unusual access attempts in real time. He said we can add secondary verification so no one moves a dollar without a call to you that you answer in your voice. I asked him to please also freeze new credit applications bearing my Social Security number. He said he would place a protective indicator across the credit bureaus and add a branch-level note that requires in-person identity confirmation for anything that touches ownership or beneficiaries. He asked if there had been a specific concern. I said family has been inquiring about capacity and placement, and I prefer to hold the pen myself. He said understood as if the word had angles. And he knew how to hold it. We ended the call with the clarity of two people who like rules. I photographed each original and saved the images to an encrypted folder whose password my hands remember better than my mind. I slid the deed, the directive, the will, and the pill, logs into a fireproof envelope I had brought because sometimes we are kinder to our future selves than we notice. I placed the envelope back in the box and took only the copies with the bank manager's card on top. The key turned with the same clean sound on the way out. The vault door rolled again, and the air outside the vault felt lighter, as if it had let go of someone else's secret. At the counter, I requested new account alerts for balances, transfers, and any address changes. The teller tapped and nodded and tapped again. She handed me a printout of the settings and said this will ping you before anything becomes a story. I thanked her and walked into the day with my papers arranged alphabetically in the folder because that is how I like to meet the unexpected. The taxi took me back to the Fairwinds. The lobby ferns attempted optimism, and the bell at the desk sang a single note before falling quiet. The keycard light turned green. The silence of a wide, impersonal room can be a kindness when you need to hear your own decisions without an echo. I set the folder on the desk and lined up the edges the way I level a frame before I step back. I opened the window an inch. Harbor air entered with the faint iron of dock chains and the salt that keeps its promises. My phone lit with a text from Dr. Simone Park. It read a colleague you can trust for counsel and included a number. Beneath it she wrote the attorney's name, Lucia Bram. I let the name sit on the screen like a north arrow, and then I pressed call. A receptionist answered with the steady manner of someone who has learned to be the first calm in a day that rarely offers any. She said Miss Bram had a noon opening for a new matter and asked if I could arrive on time. I looked at the clock and said yes. I packed not with panic but with a checklist, copies of the deed, directive, will, pill logs, bank settings printout, the doctor's note folded flat in a clear sleeve so no fresh ink would blur. My phone with the recording saved in 3 separate places, including one that would live even if the phone took a bath. The steel key I returned to its envelope. It went back into the coin pocket where my fingers could find it blind. I wrote the office address on a sticky note and slid it into the clear sleeve with the rest. Preparation is not drama. It is mercy. On the ride over, the city arranged itself into lanes and signals and scaffolding that looked like a diagram of patience. The cab drifted under a line of plane trees shaking off last leaves. Somewhere a school bell answered a church bell, and then the street forgot both. I arrived early and waited in a chair that had watched hundreds of people decide whether they would trust a stranger with their story. The receptionist offered water and I said yes, because accepting small care is a way to practice saying yes to necessary care. Lucia Bram stepped into the waiting area with a folder already open. She greeted me with a voice that made even my first name feel like a file title. We sat at a conference table that held nothing unnecessary. I placed my stack in front of me, spine aligned. She asked me to start not with pain but with facts. I told her Dr. Park's note. I told her what the return vent carried at 211. I told her the tab on a file that did not belong to the person handling it. I told her about the pill organizer out of Square. I handed her the copies of my documents and slid my phone across the table to show the evidence existed beyond speaking. She made notes not like a stenographer but like an engineer measuring span and load. She said we would issue a formal letter asserting my competence with an attached statement from my physician. She said we would file a notice of counsel to the bank and to any realtor who had touched my address. She said we would instruct all involved that any attempt to obtain authority without due process would be met with filings and, if necessary, with a request for protective orders. She said we would begin with kindness and end with clarity. I agreed with all of it as if I had been waiting for the words to arrive in that order. She asked for names and dates and spelled them back to me the way pilots repeat coordinates. She asked whether I wished to record a contemporaneous statement to memorialize events while they are still bright. I did and we did, and then she outlined next steps in bullets that clicked into place. I felt my shoulders drop 1 inch lower on the back of the chair. When I left her office, the sky had moved into that paler blue that looks almost like paper. I kept my folder close and my steps unhurried. The phone buzzed with a message from the bank. A notification read attempted address change blocked and asked me to confirm that I had not requested it. I touched the button that said no and watched the green check appear. Safety is not luck. Safety is the sum of a steel key, a vault door, a manager who speaks in complete sentences, a doctor who writes a warning in ink, and an attorney who likes verbs more than adjectives. Back at the hotel, the room welcomed me with purposeful blankness. The keycard turned the light green again. I placed my copies in the room safe and set the code that only my hands know. I let the folder rest and I let my breath fall into its own cadence. Outside, harbor ropes knocked wood with the rhythm of tides nobody commands. I stood still in the quiet and felt the weight of the key in my pocket, reminding my bones that I had moved more than air today. Lucia slid a blank legal pad between us and said, "Start with who wants what." The pad was yellow and cheerful in a way paper should not be when it is about to carry a fight. I wrote 3 names at the top and drew arrows because I like seeing motive point at method before it points at money. Matthew. Harper. Sloan. I marked Sloan with a smaller arrow and a question mark because I remembered her breath catching in the kitchen when honesty knocked. Lucia watched my pen travel. Her voice held the exact temperature of a courthouse wall. We do not argue, we document. When they step, the floor will not be there. She asked for the sequence again, as if checking a bridge span before trucks cross. I gave it to her like measurements. Note from Dr. Park. The file tab that said Draft Authority, the organizer misaligned, the vent at 211, the dates and names they spoke when they thought metal wouldn't carry it. Printer churned in the corner. Lucia's paralegal fed pages through a scanner with the light patience of someone who keeps people's futures aligned. An email ding rolled across the table, and Lucia's eyes flicked to the screen. She tapped a reply with 2 sentences and a period that landed like a gavel. She set the pen cap with a click beside her hand and turned the pad toward me. She drew a triangle with slow strokes and labeled the points. Counsel, bank, investigator, the triangle that holds. She said I will send a formal notice of representation to every institution that can be weaponized against you. She said I will request Dr. Park's attestation and attach your lab summary. She said I will remind them, gently in the first letter and firmly in the second, that any guardianship motion without evidentiary basis invites sanctions. I nodded and watched her write request physician letter and bank counsel alert and realtor freeze. She called the branch and spoke to the manager whose name lived on my husband's card. Her tone was a handshake you could feel through the line. She asked him to note counsel of record and to route any unusual attempts to her office and to my phone in parallel. He said understood and listed back our requests in his own words. Redundancy is a kind of love when systems are involved. Lucia introduced the third point: investigator. She said I work with a former claimsman who sees shadows in paper the way pilots see weather in clouds. DeMarco Voss. He is discreet, and he is patient. He will verify touch points, clinic intake leads. Title breadcrumb: devices that have been used to apply for credit where no consent existed. She wrote his name on the yellow pad and drew an arrow from method to money. She said I will have him start with what you heard and move outward like a tide. She tapped her phone once. The meeting invitation left her screen like a small ship. We gave the triangle a skeleton. Lucia drafted a short letter while I sat with my back straight because posture is a promise to yourself. Notice of representation. Preservation of evidence. Request that no action be taken on powers not granted. Attached. Copy of directive and will summary. We read it together with lips closed, the way people recite prayers they are not sure they believe in yet. She sent it. The email ding on my phone answered an echo of hers. The same letter now lived in my pocket. Her paralegal slid a headset across the table. Lucia asked if I wished to record a short statement while my memory was bright and the timeline clean. I did. We dated the file and spoke 3 minutes in plain words. I included the names of the 2 clinics and the day and hour Matthew said out loud. I said one-party consent applies in our state for recordings of conversations when one participant agrees. I added that I made mine to prevent a crime and not to entertain strangers. Lucia nodded and marked the pad with a tiny check. The triangle acquired a cable. The door opened, and a man in a well-lived jacket stepped in without hurry. I paused there and let my hand rest on the wood of the doorframe worn smooth by years of groceries and school backpacks and a dog that is now a picture. The phone on the kitchen table vibrated again and stopped. The sound made a second small circle and closed. In the quiet that followed, I could hear the pilot flame under the stove and the faint slide of a pill compartment settling back into place. Abuse often dresses itself before breakfast. It smiles. It offers coffee. The trigger was an internal note that read pending authority, source family, date yesterday. He paused and let that settle. He turned the page. Harper had opened an account with a luxury goods card provider in my name 2 months ago. The application came from a device that pinged the home network at 6:12 a.m., and the delivery address was slightly modified. The apartment number flipped from A to 4 to shake a casual glance. 2 charges, one at a boutique that still hand wraps. One at an online retailer whose warehouse knows how to ignore weekends. He slid a printed screenshot toward me with the last 4 digits masked. I watched my name sit there beside a line that did not belong to my life. He turned the next page. Matthew met a man named Nolan Pike last week for 11 minutes behind a clinic that closed in the spring. There is a camera on the adjacent locksmith that caught the handshake and the exchange of an envelope. Pike is a paper fixer. He is sloppy. Sloppy makes light for us. DeMarco's voice did not change volume, but the room moved its center closer to him. He said Pike's name has appeared in 2 investigations out of the state attorney's office and 1 joint action with health inspectors. He said Pike liked to recycle letterheads from physicians who have retired to small fishing towns. Lucia took that and cut it into filings. She said we would add Pike to our preservation notice. She said we would copy the state office with a courteous heads up and ask nothing except that they be aware a family matter may touch their map. She wrote the agency acronym on the pad. She drew a short arrow from method to consequence. DeMarco asked permission to image the outside of my home from the street for comings and goings and to log the devices that land on the network name that carries our family. He said a passive capture is lawful and would show when and where the account applications were filed. I said yes. He asked if I would provide serial numbers for my phone and laptop so he could note anything that pretended to be me from a different footprint. I handed him a note card where I had already written them because my husband trained me to be generous to tomorrow. Printer churned again. Lucia's assistant placed a stack of letters to sign. My pen moved, steady, slow. The pad on the table had become a map of arrows and nouns. Motive to method to money. My handwriting added a 4th arrow because I do not like triangles that pretend not to be pyramids. Method to law. The floor that will not be there. Lucia said the first calls will come soon. She said voice acting as concern is a tactic. She said silence is an answer when you have counsel. If a clerk calls, you route them here. If a realtor calls, you route them here. If a stranger calls about a friendly review of your plan, you route them here. She paused and found my face fully. You are not required to persuade anyone on the phone. Your job is to remain the person who signs her own name. I felt my shoulder blades release another minute of tension into the chair. Another email ding. DeMarco looked down. He said Seabright froze the draft. The junior agent had already been told by the broker to require scanned authority before touching the file again. He smiled in a way that didn't celebrate. That is good. Messier for them if they try to go around procedure. We set the next 24 hours in lines that did not need adjectives. Bank two-factor plus branch note live. Credit bureau freeze placed. Title firm notified of counsel and of no authority. Clinics receive letters reminding them that diagnosis is not an opinion made to order. Dr. Park to forward her summary and sign her statement. DeMarco to capture footage near the shuttered clinic and pull the locksmith camera if permitted. Lucia to prepare a template for a protective petition in case the family attempts an ex parte maneuver. I wrote each line on the yellow pad and drew a square beside it. Check boxes or small doors. We stood. Lucia capped her pen. The soft click sounded like permission to stop gripping the day. She walked me to the reception and spoke to the paralegal in a voice that made tasks want to be done. DeMarco stepped out with me into the hallway and lowered his voice half an inch. You are doing this correctly. Not fast. Correctly. I do not need you to be brave. I need you to keep your phone charged and your folder dry. I told him I would and that I would keep my hands from the door when fear asks me to slam it. Outside, the sky had brightened into the pale that makes edges sharper. My phone buzzed with a tiny storm. Missed call from Matthew, missed call from Harper. A text from an unknown number inviting me to a free consultation on senior financial safety. I forwarded it to Lucia without adding a word. The reply came back with a single period that felt like a shield being lifted into place. Back at the Fairwinds, the room accepted my return without comment. I opened the window an inch. The harbor answered with rope-knocking wood and gulls trading opinions nobody asked for. I took the yellow pad from my bag and set it on the desk. Arrows, names, boxes. I filled the first square with ink where a box had waited for direction. Build a case like a bridge. Redundancy, weight distribution, testing. The structure will not care about anyone's feelings. It will hold anyway. The glass doors of Seabright Realty were mirrors. 3 familiar outlines arrived 5 minutes late and hovered in the reflection like choices I had already made. Inside, the lobby held a polite ocean hush, the kind created by carpet that swallows footsteps and art that pretends to have no opinion. At the front desk, a small leather case sat beside a pen tray. A notary seal waited in its cradle like a stamp that understood gravity. The junior agent introduced herself with the quick brightness of someone eager to impress a broker who is not in the room. She led us to a conference table with a bowl of polished stones and a stack of pre-printed forms. Matthew rolled his shoulders as if loosening for a game. Harper straightened the pile in front of her until corners aligned with the table edge. Sloane drifted toward a chair near the wall and watched the hallway as if a door might offer her an alibi. The agent spoke in a helpful tone. To begin, I will need to see the power of attorney before we proceed. She looked at me when she said it, then redirected her eyes to Matthew as if the habit had been trained by other families. Matthew answered with a practiced calm. It is processing. We can start the appraisal. He placed a folder near the agent's hand like a card laid down in a friendly game. Harper nodded as if to bless the moment. She said timing is tight in this market. No harm in getting a head start. I set my files on the table without touching theirs. Or we can start with the law. The room did not chill or crack. It simply adjusted. The agent blinked once, then twice, the way people do when a script has skipped a line. She asked again to view the authority. Matthew repeated that it was in process. Harper added that the county is slow, but the intention is clear. She said intention the way some people say prayer. The agent pivoted to her screen for the listing portal. She typed our address and stopped halfway, eyes narrowing at a line that should not exist. Pre-entry shows pending POA, she said slowly, and then her voice gained spine, entered by Harper Quinn. She looked at Harper, then at me, then at the notary case as if the metal inside it could rule. Harper's smile tightened and then recovered. Administrative placeholders keep files neat, she said. Spares everyone later steps. She folded her hands as if the meeting were a candle that needed shielding. The agent's cursor hovered over freeze file like a bird reconsidering landing. She said office policy requires a copy of a valid power of attorney before any valuation work begins. She did not reach for the forms again. She reached for the leather case and set it squarely in front of her as if the weight of the seal might convince the air to behave. I put my phone on the table and touched the speaker icon. Lucia answered on the first ring with a voice that carried order. I introduced the room without ceremony. Lucia said her name and title for the benefit of any camera that might not be visible. She asked the agent to note counsel of record for the homeowner. She asked if the brokerage had already taken action based on a placeholder entry that references authority not yet granted. The agent glanced at her screen and shook her head. I will freeze this file until valid documentation is presented. Her fingers pressed keys with relief disguised as compliance. Matthew leaned in. We are a family trying to coordinate care, he said. There is no need to escalate a simple timeline issue. He turned his palms upward, the universal sign for Shirley. Harper added that they had spoken to a community near the bay, and deposits are time-sensitive. She formed the word deposit with respect, as if it were a guest she hoped would stay for dinner. Sloane looked at me, and then at the floor, one ankle circling a slow figure 8 under the chair. Lucia asked the agent to add a note to the internal log. No action based on placeholder. Counsel requires copies of any inbound correspondence referencing authority or valuation. She thanked the agent as if the request were a favor instead of policy. Then Lucia asked if the branch manager from my bank could join by video for 2 minutes. The agent shrugged and nodded. The notary lifted her phone as if this too was in her jurisdiction and pushed the camera stand toward the center of the table. The screen lit with Gerald Benton in a tie that had decided never to wrinkle. He greeted the agent by name and greeted me with the measured warmth of a person who understands where reassurance ends and record begins. He said the bank had placed 2-factor protocols and a branch note for any attempt to alter my accounts. He said there had been an attempted address change not long ago, blocked and logged. He said he could also confirm a cash advance of $28,900 issued from a luxury account opened in my name, now flagged. The recipient's withdrawal pattern matched a known associate named Nolan Pike. He paused. He said law enforcement had been notified of the account activity, and the bank stood ready with documentation. Harper absorbed the statement with a stillness I recognized from people who prefer to argue later, in rooms with fewer witnesses. Matthew cleared his throat and said misunderstandings happen with data at scale. He said we all know systems generate ghost entries. He said his mother has always been private and this is simply a coordination gap. His words piled gently and then slid. The notary seal case made a soft clack when she closed it, as if to mark a page. The agent folded her hands and found a neutral sentence. Without proof of authority, we cannot proceed. She looked relieved to borrow those words from a manual written by someone she would never meet. Procedure is a shelter when a storm wants to borrow your roof. Lucia spoke again. She asked the agent to memorialize the freeze and to send a copy of her internal note to our office. She asked Gerald to forward his activity report with the blocked address change and the cash advance record to both the brokerage and counsel. She thanked the notary for witnessing the identities in the room and asked her to add a line to her ledger. Noted presence of parties asserting pending authority without documentation. The notary wrote. The agent typed. Gerald's screen went to hold while he arranged the email. None of it was loud. All of it was final. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from DeMarco slid into view with the efficiency of a verdict. Pike flipped. State AG looped. I watched the words settle like a string pulled tight across a frame. Lucia's voice did not change. Thank you, she said softly to no one in particular. Then to the room she explained in a sentence with no decoration that a cooperating witness had confirmed a document pattern relevant to our matter, and that any attempt to rely on such documents would be unwise. Harper stood. Her smile had retired. She said this is humiliating and unnecessary, and that she had only tried to spare me complications. She did not look at the agent when she said spare. She looked at Sloane as if a child could add back a kind of innocence that had already been spent. Sloane whispered something too small for the room to carry. She rubbed her thumb over the edge of the chair as if the fabric had offended her. Matthew gathered his folder with an economy that admitted defeat without naming it. He said, "We will return when the county puts ink where it belongs." He did not ask whether the county would agree. He did not use the word permission. He waited for someone to bless a route that had narrowed to a path without rails. The agent stood as well and offered a perfunctory thank you for coming. Her hand hovered over a business card and then withdrew it. "Our office will await your documents," she said. She meant our office will not forget today exists. Gerald returned to the screen and confirmed his reports had been sent. He asked if there was anything further the bank could do at this time. Lucia said he had done enough, and that enough was a compliment. He nodded once and signed off. The notary placed her seal in the leather case and closed it with a second soft clack. Two small sounds that told the story of a door that could open but did not. Harper and Matthew moved toward the glass doors together, their reflections briefly taller than their bodies. Sloane lagged behind and then followed, her foot touching only every other tile. The doors released them into the afternoon with the hydraulic patience of institutions, and the lobby returned to its ocean hush. The agent exhaled a breath she had held through professionalism. She turned her monitor so I could see the freeze confirmed in the system, a red bar across our address that meant procedure was no longer a suggestion. I thanked her for choosing policy over pressure. Lucia asked me to keep the line open while she reached DeMarco. She did not need to add the instruction, "Do not speak to anyone else for the next hour." The habit had chosen me already. Outside, traffic performed its ordinary choreography. Inside, the room kept its rules. I looked at the notary case and thought of how authority, when honest, does not raise its voice. It makes a mark. It waits for the page to cool. Then it keeps a ledger that anyone can read later without embarrassment. We walked back through the mirrors, where 3 outlines had appeared 5 minutes late. The reflections shifted. Only one remained. Not taller or smaller, just more solid. Procedure had done what it promises when people let it. It protected the air from being named something it was not. I walked down the staircase while the notary opened her ledger to a fresh line. The lobby carried that contained ocean sound of carpet and quiet machines. The pen in her hand hovered over paper like a small crane choosing where to place a beam. The junior agent stood beside the screen, cursor waiting. Matthew and Harper faced the table with their folders shut, edges aligned. Sloane kept to the wall as if paint might offer cover. I set my phone on the conference wood and let the recorder wake without fanfare. The red dot did not need an audience. I said I will play something brief for the record. The notary nodded and wrote our names with neat loops, then raised her eyes to confirm faces to entries. She did not look at the family to be impressed. She looked so later would be clean. The clip began with kitchen air, the small metal tick of a pot finding cool. Then Harper's voice shaped an idea into harm. Confusion needs a pattern if you want a judge to accept it. The vent had carried that sentence in the house. Now the room gave it back without apology. The agent's hands stilled. The notary's pen paused in midair. Matthew's jaw flexed once, a habit he had when a line did not go his way. I stopped the clip after that single sentence and let quiet hold the furniture. "This is enough for the moment," I said. "We do not need to hear more unless anyone pretends not to understand." The notary completed the line under my name and drew a small square where a signature might live if a person authorized it. Beneath, she wrote Matthew Quinn and left the space blank. The ledger waited without offering dignity it did not owe. The agent spoke first. "Until valid documents exist, this file is frozen." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The policy carried its own volume. She adjusted the screen so the freeze banner sat across the address like a seatbelt. She reached for the notary seal and closed the case with a firm, soft clack that sounded like a page closing on purpose. Matthew tried for the tone he used in school offices when he was 17, and certain he could charm a rule. "We are mid-process. There is no cause to obstruct a routine valuation." He placed his palm on the folder as if warmth could animate papers. He did not touch the ledger. His line stayed empty and honest about it. Harper's smile attempted repair and found no purchase. She said, "This is a misunderstanding of care." She said, "Preparing options is not exploitation." She said the words in a sequence that wanted to sound like virtue. Sloane stared at the floor and worked her thumbnail along a seam on the chair until the fabric surrendered a single thread. I took the notary's pen and pointed to the ledger without touching it. "If I were incompetent, I would not be here to buy. You are here to sell what is not yours." The sentence did not echo. It simply landed. The agent's cursor moved again, not over our address now, but over the internal note field where today would repeat in text for anyone who later needed a map. The bank's printers started in some distant room I could not see. The sound came through the speaker on the table where Gerald waited on hold, steady as a metronome that had decided to help. Pages slid into trays while the lobby television poured a silent ribbon across the bottom of a news anchor's face. The state attorney's office announcement scrolled by in white on red, subtitles naming a broader investigation into healthcare paperwork fraud. No volume. Words were enough. Gerald returned to the screen and held up 2 pages to confirm transmission. Address change attempt blocked. Cash advance trace complete. Recipient pattern consistent with Nolan Pike. His voice stayed in the register professionals save for wrecks and weddings. The notary wrote Pike on her line of notes and drew a small arrow to remind herself who the cast had become. Matthew exhaled through his nose. The sound tried to be patience and was not. He said, "You cannot expect a family to operate without efficiency." He said guardianship exists for a reason. He did not say for love. He did not say for safety. He left those decorations in the bag. Harper aimed her next attempt at the notary, as if the ledger belonged to her. She said there must be a way to let a simple valuation proceed while papers complete. The notary's eyes did not blink. "I certify what exists, not what someone hopes to have." She closed the leather case fully now, both clasps catching with a tiny dual click like a lock agreeing with itself. Sloane finally looked up. The lobby light found the rim of her eyes and made a soft flare. She did not move toward me. She did not move toward them. She kept her hands on the chair, as if furniture were a shoreline where a person can stand and watch both tide and land without deciding which one to become. I pressed the phone screen and let the lawful clip breathe one more second. Not the sentence about patterns, but the sound of Matthew after. "We get control, then we liquidate." His voice in the duct had been lower. Here the room gave it back evenly. I stopped it again before anything else could try to contaminate the air. "That is sufficient," I said. The agent said it is. Pens stopped moving. Gerald's printers started again, an audit log sprouting its own precise leaves. The lobby television's silent ticker added a second line about cooperating witnesses and a hotline for victims of document abuse. The picture above it showed a seal I had seen on letterhead once when I helped a neighbor dispute a contractor's lie. The same emblem now lived where my day had come to meet procedure. Harper lifted her bag by the short handle meant for quick exits. "This is cruel," she said, and left the sentence unclothed by context. She turned and caught her reflection in the glass. She smoothed her hair without seeing it. Matthew closed his folder with a slap that wanted to be piano and landed as cardboard. He said, "We will return with signatures that satisfy." The ledger did not answer him. It held its blank under his name until ink learned how to deserve it. The agent thanked Gerald and the notary and me for the clarity. She printed the freeze confirmation and slid it across the table in my direction, not to be signed, only to be seen. The document was small, but it knew its job. I folded it once and placed it with my papers so it could make friends with other pages that had kept me upright. We walked as a group toward the exit. The lobby air felt cooler the closer we came to the doors. The glass released us with a slow hydraulic sigh that reminded me of clinic doors and courtroom doors, and any door that has learned not to dramatize the people passing. Outside, traffic made its normal decisions. Inside, a rule had held its ground. Matthew and Harper stepped into the afternoon without looking back. Sloane paused near the planter where someone had tried to grow something tropical in a temperate zip code. She pulled the thread she had worried, and then realized her fingers had done it. She let it go. It floated to the carpet and lay there like a line that had given up pretending to be whole. She followed them. I stayed with the agent and the notary a moment longer. The notary touched her ledger as if checking the page had cooled. The agent glanced again at the television, where the ticker went on listing facts for anyone who needed to see without hearing. Lucia's voice came through the speaker still open on the table. "Nicely done. No adjectives, only nouns with dates." I said thank you. My throat did not need water. It needed the relief the body feels when a level show's bubble-centered. The agent shook my hand with a pressure that said, "We will remember." The notary slid her seal back into its cradle for the next page that would demand it. We dispersed without ceremony because ceremony belongs to victories that need applause. This one needed only a record. In the parking lot, sun heated the roofs of cars and made a wavering mirage over the asphalt. My phone buzzed once with a message from DeMarco that contained only a street name and a time, and the word obtained. Evidence does not celebrate. It sits still until asked to stand. I looked back through the glass. The notary had reopened her ledger for the next appointment. The line under Matthew's name remained an honest white. Public sunlight had done the work private rooms refused to do. The story broke where it should break, under bulbs that do not care about anyone's feelings, next to a seal that looks like a small moon and acts like gravity. I put the freeze confirmation into my folder and walked toward the curb where the city sent a taxi without commentary. Lucia said Pike isn't bargaining. He's cooperating. The sentence landed without ceremony. We stood by the elevator with our folders like travelers who packed correctly. The chimes sounded once, clean as a tuning fork. Inside the car, the mirror cut our faces into stillness that did not require courage. We rode down into a day that had decided to widen. The courthouse corridor was cool and long. Air moved as if someone had taught it how to be neutral. DeMarco waited near a door with a lettered plaque that did not brag. He handed Lucia a thin envelope and me a look that meant the work had become brighter without becoming easier. He said quietly that Pike had provided a packet and a confirmation that would speak in rooms with seals. His words were careful as if vowels might break. He did not smile. We stepped into a briefing room that once held a jury and now held a table, 2 microphones, and a small recorder that clicked awake when a fingertip tested it. A technician performed the ritual every public structure knows by heart. Microphone check. 1, 2, silence. Again. The room agreed to listen. Lucia slid the envelope across to me and let me open it. A thumb drive rested inside, labeled in block letters with a word that had decorated lies for a decade. Templates. The plastic felt warmer than it should have, as if it had remembered human hands. Lucia said the Attorney General's office has formal statements from Pike and a video of a cash handoff in a lot behind the shuttered clinic. She placed the drive near the recorder and did not push it into any machine yet. She preferred to let objects announce themselves before they performed. DeMarco outlined what sat in the metadata without stepping on the questions we had not been asked. File names that matched a retired physician's letterhead. Scans that used the same shadow from the same scanner lid. Messages from 2 numbers, one saved under Harper Q, one saved under M. Quinn, both referencing capacity forms, both using that phrase as if it were a door you can borrow from a neighbor and install in your house without permits. My phone buzzed on the table and rolled half an inch. A text from Sloan blinked on the lock screen without emojis. They planned to pin the thefts on me. I kept screenshots. The room stayed the same size, but my breath changed how it fit. Lucia saw the message and nodded once, as if a planned weather front had arrived on time. She said, "Invite her here under the rules we set." Calm voice. No comfort that turns to softness. We are building a bridge, not a song. I told Sloan the address, and that I would meet her in the lobby by the vending machines. I told her in the same sentence that this would go on record, and that lies today would become heavy tomorrow. She wrote back one word: understood. She arrived in 10 minutes with a gray hoodie that made her look like she was trying to be smaller than her age. She stood too straight for someone who wanted to vanish. We returned through the corridor while a bailiff pushed a cart of binders past us without noticing anyone's narrative. We sat at the table with the microphones quiet. Lucia set a legal pad between us and wrote 3 lines before she let her pen rest. Therapy, school, sworn statement. She rotated the pad so Sloan could read. I turned my chair an inch and faced the girl who had scrolled her phone while her mother practiced mercy in a kitchen that had no appetite for it. "You cannot bring me half a truth," I said. "I will not carry it." She looked down once and then up. "I will bring all of it," she said, on record. The technician switched on the recorder and announced the date and time. The microphone made a tiny breath that microphones make when they are ready to hear people confess ordinary human things dressed as facts. Sloan placed her phone screen up and opened a folder where you could see messages organized by names, each thread time stamped in a font that does not care how a mother smiles. She scrolled to the day after the realty office turned into a wall. Screenshots showed a conversation between Harper and Matthew. "If it goes bad, we say she took the card." A second line: "She always wanted things. Teenagers are believable." Then a photo of the shopping bag with a caption every court would understand: "This is yours now if anyone asks." Sloane's voice did not tremble until she reached a message where she had asked what happens when the story is over. Matthew wrote back without abbreviations. "Then we move forward as a family." She swallowed and steadied. She showed DeMarco a thread with a contact saved as Nolan Pike, where Harper asked for a sample letter that mentions mild cognitive decline and ability to benefit from directed care. Pike had replied with a template and a tip to print on heavier paper to help pens ride better. The cruelty of competence has no smell. It moves through rooms in polite shoes. Lucia asked Sloane to state her name and relationship and to confirm that her screen captures were complete. Sloane did, voice low but not thin. Lucia asked if she had been asked to lie to a physician. Sloane said her mother had asked her to emphasize scattered moments when my attention had been elsewhere and to call them pattern. Lucia asked what Sloane wanted in exchange for telling the truth. Sloane read the 3 lines Lucia had written. Therapy. School. Sworn statement. She said, I want help to finish and to decide what happens next to me. I want to stop pretending I do not see harm when it wears my last name. Lucia summarized the conditions. We will arrange counseling that is not a family friend. We will involve a school advisor who knows how to protect a student who assists a case. We will ask you to sign your statement under oath and to testify if called. We will not rescue you from consequences of anything you did for yourself. We will sign nothing that says you were forced. Sloane nodded. She turned her phone to camera mode and recorded a fresh statement into the microphone with the file name, today's date, and her name spelled without mistake. DeMarco slid a form across and asked for her device identifier so he could compare it to the logs from the home network. He did not reach for her phone. He asked for the numbers she did not have to memorize because the device knows them. She handed him a small handwritten card where she had copied them, so she did not have to hand anything else over. The habit of preparation runs in blood even when love does not. Lucia cracked the thumb drive case the way a careful person opens a medicine bottle and pushed the drive into a laptop that had never seen the inside of my house. A folder bloomed on the desktop with the word templates, and inside sat 3 subfolders labeled MD letters, social worker notes, and timeline help. The last title made the room colder. DeMarco reviewed the video Pike had given them. The image showed Matthew's shoulders under a ball cap and an envelope exchange that did not pretend to be anything else. The audio recorded a few seconds of parking lot wind and then a phrase from Pike about capacity being a door if you know how to knock. The camera did not care about metaphor. It kept moving pixels into evidence. Lucia called the Attorney General's contact and identified herself in one sentence that had the shape of a key. The voice on the other end did not ask for a story. It asked for labels and dates, then offered a time for a formal handoff. Lucia accepted. She requested a brief meeting with the investigator assigned, not to coordinate, only to avoid stepping on a wire that had already been laid. The corridor outside our door let a siren pass so far away it sounded like the memory of one. Sloane sat with her hands around a paper cup the technician had placed by the water pitcher. Her thumbs pressed the rim in slow circles that left no mark. I told her therapy was not punishment. I told her school without lying to yourself was not a luxury. I told her truth today would not make her a hero because sometimes that word ruins people, but it would make her a person who can sleep. She said sleep sounded like a rich person's word. I said rest then. I said breath without a stone on it. She smiled a little and then stopped, because this was not a day for finding out that laughter still works. We closed the session with signatures that mattered. Lucia wrote her name with the same pressure she had used to draw the triangle when this was still a theory. The technician saved the audio to 3 places and wrote the location of each on a white label stuck to the back of the recorder like a ship's manifest. DeMarco passed me a short list of what would happen next. Preserve. Handoff. Update. None of the verbs belonged to an argument. All of them belonged to a structure. On the way out, the elevator waited with its doors open like a mouth that had learned to say nothing. The chime sounded again, and the car took us back to a floor that smelled like paper and old carpet and justice waiting on its good shoes. In the lobby, Sloane paused near the vending machines, where a coil of metal protected a row of small sugar. She pressed her palms against the glass as if it were a window on a different weather system. She said, I am scared. I said, fear is a visitor. It does not get a drawer. We walked to the doors and let the city in. Outside, the sky had a hard edge you could draw a ruler against. Lucia checked her phone and nodded at a message I did not need to see. DeMarco tilted his head as if listening for something only he could hear, and then stood down. My own phone buzzed twice. Harper. Then Matthew. I did not answer. I forwarded each call log silently to Lucia, because silence can also be a sentence. We stood there without hugging like people who respect the work of air. Lucia said one more thing in her measured way. If the girl wavers, remind her that a half-truth is a lie with a clean shirt. I said I would. Sloan looked at me, and then at the courthouse where the flag did not move because the wind did not ask it to. Accountability can start with one person who stops lying. We walked to the curb. The thumb drive in Lucia's pocket carried a set of paths that had been used to hurt strangers. Today, those same paths would be used to mend the floor under my feet. The judge tapped a pen once, and the room forgot to breathe. Wood and wool and paper held still. I sat beside Lucia and counted my pulse until it matched the clock on the far wall. When my name was called, I stood. The oath was a short bridge. My voice carried across it without shaking. The stack of exhibits waited on the clerk's desk with colored tabs like small flags. Blue for bank, green for medical, yellow for realty, red for recordings. The clerk handed the first set to the bench. Lucia's hand rested near mine, not touching, steady as a metronome that prefers truth over music. The prosecutor began with order. Bank record first. A printed log that showed an attempted address change, blocked. Then the cash advance on a luxury account opened in my name, traced to a withdrawal pattern that matched a man called Nolan Pike. The camera in the locksmith lot played on a small screen at counsel table. An envelope changed hands. Wind moved across the microphone. No commentary, only film doing what it was made to do. Next came the medical. Dr. Simone Park's attestation. Labs normal. Cognition intact. A summary that sounded like a clean room with windows that open. The judge read and nodded once, a movement so slight it could have been a thought. The Guardian petition that did not exist was already smaller. The realty file followed. Seabright's internal log, printed and initialed by the junior agent. A pre-entry with the phrase, POA pending, entered by Harper, the freeze note beneath it. No action without valid authority. The brokerage policy was a quiet wall. Everyone saw it and respected it because walls are useful when people forget where not to fall. Then the recording. Lucia requested permission to play a brief excerpt. Granted. The clip that had once lived in a kitchen vent filled the courtroom with an even sound. Harper's voice said that confusion needs a pattern if you want a judge to accept it. Then silence. We did not play more. We did not need to. The sentence did its work and sat down. The prosecutor asked me what I wanted from the court. I said, I am not seeking revenge. I am restoring the edges of my life. The words left my mouth without decoration. They landed the way tools land on a bench when the day is ready for work. Sloan was called. She walked to the stand with her shoulders square and her chin undecided. The oath touched her and seemed to make her taller by a fraction. She opened her phone and the screen brightened the way truth sometimes does before it admits cost. She read a thread between her parents. If it goes bad, we say she took the card. Teenagers are believable. Another line. Deposit needs to move now. Then the image of a shopping bag with the caption that transferred guilt as if it were merchandise. She read the message from Pike about printing on heavier paper so pens ride better. She read the phrase, capacity forms. She did not rush. She did not dramatize. She named what she had seen and then stopped speaking when the fact ended. The defense asked if she was angry with her parents. She said yes and also no. She said she was angry at what people do when they forget the person inside the plan. The defense asked if she had been promised money. She said she had been promised therapy and help with school and the chance to tell the truth without being punished for it. The court reporter looked up for a second and then continued typing. DeMarco took the stand next. He spoke like a man who lays planks and checks the nails. He confirmed the origin of the credit application. He matched the device to the home network. He identified the lot camera and the date of the footage. He explained how the template files on the thumb drive shared a scanner shadow, the same ghost of a lid in the upper corner. He did not reach for adjectives. He touched only nouns and dates. A memorandum from the Attorney General's office entered the record on stipulation. It stated that Pike had agreed to cooperate. It listed 3 file names. It referenced an ongoing investigation into clinic paperwork fraud. It did not attempt to tell my story for me. It simply lit part of the path that ran alongside it. The judge asked me one question. Had I been prevented from accessing my accounts or my property since the bank and brokerage placed the freezes and notes? No. Had I felt threatened? No. Concerned? Yes. But safe in the places where rules hold. The judge nodded again, the same small acceptance of an acceptable answer. Lucia spoke for less than a minute. She asked for protective orders that would bar anyone from applying for guardianship without notice and a hearing. She asked for an order instructing banks, clinics, and realty offices to route any communication about me through counsel. She asked for a referral to the district attorney for review of possible financial crimes and a referral to the attorney general where the Pike record overlapped. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at the gallery. She waited. The judge set the pages in a tidy stack and tapped a pen once more. Protective orders are granted. The bench directed institutions to honor counsel notices. The court forwarded the record to the district attorney and noted the overlap with the state investigation. The gavel rapped once and sounded like a period at the end of a sentence that had been too long in drafting. The hallway held its hush. People walked with paper pressed to their ribs and faces set to neutral. Lucia and I stepped aside as a camera crew passed, lenses lowered in courtesy until we cleared the door. In the distance, shutters ticked like small insects learning to speak. I did not stop for microphones. I did not add narration to a day that had already spoken enough. Matthew and Harper stood near the elevators in a block of light. Matthew kept his hands in his pockets. Harper looked at the floor as if a message might be printed there that said, "This will go away." Sloane stood apart from them, nearer the water fountain, as if thirst might teach her how to take only what is offered. She looked at me. I nodded once in a way that meant only keep going. We reached the building steps. Air moved across the plaza with the mild insistence of weather that does not care how any person feels about it. Lucia spoke beside me without turning her head. "Preliminary findings will move quickly now. The orders are in effect. The referrals are live. You will get calls you do not have to take." I said yes. She asked if I wanted a car. I said I would like to walk a block first and hear my own shoes. We moved past a planter filled with low shrubs that did not mind a courthouse. A woman touched my sleeve and said thank you. She did not explain for what. She did not need to. I kept moving because stopping would have made me cry. The sound of the city returned like a radio after a storm. Buses sighed. A street musician tried 2 notes and then found a third. A pigeon misjudged a curb and corrected itself without shame. Back at the hotel, I placed the copy of the orders beside the freeze confirmation from the brokerage and the bank logs that had started this steady march. The pages made a small wall on the desk. Nothing dramatic, just enough to remind me where the edge is now. I closed the safe and pressed my palms to the door for a second, acknowledging the click that meant something I own was holding steady. Sloane texted once. I told the truth. I am going home to pack a bag. I answered with 3 sentences. Call me when you are safe in a neutral place. I will meet you at the entrance. Bring your school identification and nothing you cannot explain. Lucia texted a moment later. The district attorney acknowledged receipt and will assign. The state office will coordinate. You did exactly what you said you would do. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the room be a room. My heart had slowed to its regular task, and my hands had stopped rehearsing a signature. Lawful process can be slow and still be merciful to the truth. It asks for patience and gives back edges. I breathed in air that smelled of salt and carpet cleaner and the faint metal of keys. I thought of the lighthouse charm on the hook at home and of a line in a ship log that records no storm, only the fact of arrival. The phone buzzed with a call I would not answer. I forwarded it to Lucia and turned the device face down. Through the window, a low cloud moved like a careful hand. Somewhere a gavel had already been hung on its peg. Somewhere a clerk labeled a folder and slid it onto a shelf where gravity treated it exactly like every other case. I slept for 20 minutes without dreaming, and woke with the simple task of standing up and walking toward the next door that would open because a rule told it to. Morning coffee tasted like air, not victory. I held the mug at the sink of a place that knew my name only because I had written it on a lease. The cottage faced water that moved without asking permission. Curtains breathed in and out as if the house had its own lungs. The lighthouse keychain rested on the sill, brass warmed by thin Sunday. I turned it once in my palm and set it back where light could teach it to shine. The file box clicked shut like a small spine deciding to stand. Papers settled inside with the soft surrender of fabric to a drawer, protective orders, freeze confirmations, a letter from the district attorney acknowledging receipt, another from the attorney general confirming coordination. I slid the box onto the top shelf of a closet and let the door close without rushing. Some endings do not need applause, they need gravity. Lucia called after 8 with a voice that sounded like a morning walk. She said a civil case had opened where the title attempt had left its fingerprints. The brokerage had closed the loop with an internal review. Their insurer had agreed to a compact sum to resolve time and counsel costs, not an admission, a practical reckoning for a mess that had stepped onto their floor. Lucia said the wire could arrive by Friday. I listened to the numbers and saw not a ledger, but a door. I told her I wanted to spool that money forward. She waited. The clinic, where Dr. Park works, has a social work arm that catches people before a guardianship petition catches them. I said I want to seed something that buys hours and counsel and a safe night for someone who is listening to a vent and does not yet own a recorder. Lucia did not ask if I was sure. She asked what we would call it. I said Harbor Light Fund, and then smiled because names are only useful if they point at something that does not move. I met Dr. Park in a side office with windows that overlooked the parking lot and a maple that refused to fail at flaming red. She wore the kind of tired that belongs to people who do not look at clocks enough. I told her what Lucia had arranged. Her shoulders lowered. She said, "You are turning pain into a handle someone else can grab." I said, "I am only returning something my husband stored for me in a vault I did not yet know I would need." We signed a simple agreement drafted by the clinic council. It said the fund would pay for evaluations by doctors who do not sell letters, consultations with elder law, and hotel nights when a person needs air more than furniture. The clinic director stepped in with a pen that had the clinic logo, wrote his name in neat lines, and thanked me in a way that did not ask me to be a hero. The front desk knew nothing about it by design. The best help sometimes arrives through a back door and leaves without taking a bow. Back at the cottage, I lifted the window latch. Air moved across the counter and raised goose flesh along my forearms like a warning in reverse. Gulls argued outside with the ancient worldliness that seagulls pretend not to own. The city sat far off, a collection of lines that meant commerce, noise, other people's choices. I breathed, and the room agreed to let me. Sloane knocked that afternoon with a backpack and a face that had learned how to wait. Therapy had started. School had placed her with a counselor who used exact words and nodded at the right time. She stood in the entry without stepping farther. I told her to come in and put her bag down where it would not trip anyone. She touched the lighthouse keychain with a fingertip before she set her own phone beside it, a small pledge. We sat at the small table that came with the house. She said I will earn the second chance I asked for. She did not ask me to clap for the idea. She did not cry. We agreed on rules. She would not bring chaos past the door. I would not bring silence past hers. Therapy appointments would be on the calendar. Homework would be on the table before 9. We would talk when talking is honest, and hold quiet when quiet does not punish. She reached across the table and set her finger on the edge of my mug as if to ground herself. I thought of the kitchen where she had tapped her phone instead of speaking, the way her throat had moved when she swallowed words. Now her voice had joints again. It bent and did not break. Lucia sent a short message that evening. Wire complete. Clinic confirmed. She added a thank you that fit in a single line. I wrote back with a picture of the keychain and the word done, doctor. Park sent a note an hour later. First referral supported. A daughter from the east side needed 2 nights and a consult. Harbor Light Fund had paid for a hotel near the river and a meeting in this very building. I stared at the screen until letters steadied and then set the phone face down because joy can knock a person back if she is not braced. I kept the day simple. I cleaned the cottage the way I used to clean my mind by choosing one small corner and making it mercilessly right. I scrubbed the sink until it returned light without argument. I arranged the 3 books I had brought in a line that made sense only to me. I set a small plant in the window and told it that water is a promise, not a wish. I opened the closet and looked once at the file box. It looked back the way a tool looks at a hand, ready if needed, fine to be left alone. The phone rang twice more, both times from numbers I had forwarded to Lucia since the first protective orders arrived. I did not answer. She would communicate on my behalf with the dry confidence that turns demands into reminders about policy. I stirred soup in a pot that did not yet have a favorite burner. The spoon moved in circles and I counted them until the heat reached the edge and stayed there. When I tasted salt, I remembered to smile. It tasted like air again. Not triumph. Capacity. In the evening, Sloane stood at the window with her hands on the latch and asked if she could say something that might be wrong. I told her she could say it and we would find out together. She said forgiveness is not a trick, but it can be a trap when people use it as a shortcut. I said boundaries make forgiveness breathe or else it chokes. I said kindness without boundaries is surrender. I am finished surrendering. She nodded and looked at the water until her eyes softened. Night carried no whispers into this house. The vents moved air and nothing else. We read a chapter each in separate chairs. She looked up sometimes to tell me a line with her eyes before her mouth found it, then looked down again when she realized I was not measuring her. The kettle made a small contented kind of hiss and did not try to become a plot. Sleep came without rehearsal. Morning arrived with light that had brushed the water first. I poured coffee and stood with the mug pressed to my sternum, not as a shield, as a warm weight. Sloane left for school with her bag on both shoulders and her hair pulled back. She did not ask for money. She did not offer gratitude too big for the hour. She said, "See you at 5," and the cottage made space for the sentence to hang for a breath before it walked out with her. Later, I walked the short path along the bay. A man threw a ball for a dog who pretended to be dignified before losing to joy. 2 women discussed a recipe with the seriousness of Parliament. A child tested a scooter and then turned to grin at her own bravery. The world had not been rewritten on my behalf. It had simply been allowed to continue where the edges of my life had been redrawn. On the way home, I stopped at the clinic with a paper bag of pastries that smelled like butter, remembering wheat. I handed the bag to the front desk with a note for Dr. Park. No signatures, no announcement. Just a thank you to a hallway that had agreed to share its rules. The clerk smiled and said the maple will drop leaves next week, and the sidewalk will look like a carpet that someone forgot to roll up. I said I would bring a broom. Back at the cottage, I opened the windows and let gulls argue again. I set the lighthouse keychain in the center of my palm. It fit the way it always had. Not heavier, not lighter, just honest about what it could do. It could point and it could gleam. The rest was motion. Lucia called once more from the curb outside a courthouse I did not need to enter. She said the next hearing would be scheduled without my presence unless something unexpected appeared. She said the referrals stood and the orders held. She said if I needed to travel, I should do it with my head up and my phone charged. I told her I might take a train up the coast and watch the ocean pretend to race us. She said, "Take the aisle if you want to get up and stretch." I laughed and hung up, and the sound felt like a muscle that had been asleep waking without pain. At sunset, Sloane returned with a stack of papers and a plan for a civics project about consent and guardianship that made me want to clap. I didn't. I asked for her outline instead. She showed me a list of sources and a paragraph that did not overreach. We ate soup at the small table and set our spoons down when we were done. She washed. I dried. The plates clinked in a language I had missed. Before bed, I checked the window latches. I pressed the safe door and felt the small assurance of a closed square. I touched the file box once through wood and let it be. The city hummed far off. The gulls had found other roofs. The air came clean through screens and did not ask for my attention. Repair is the point. Punishment may walk its own path now with people who manage that road. Justice opened a door. Wisdom decided who walked through. I turned off the lamp and let the cottage keep breathing. The keychain on the sill caught the last piece of light and returned it to the room as if to say, "Remember." I did. Then I slept and did not dream of notes or ledgers or seals. I dreamed of water and a line of stones making a path to shore that did not wobble when a person stepped. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.